have it go back to, I don't know, I'll let you know, probably on Monday. And then the final exam will also be over poetry. In the final exam, rather than have a quiz on Tuesday and then have a bunch of extra credit possible on Wednesday, the final exam will probably have 30 to 50 points extra credit. Okay, that will be comprehensive. It'll go back to the beginning of the semester. So use your quizzes, previous exams, notes and stuff to study for that. And if you could get a lot of points that way. So for today, we're going to do 4 poems. She Walks in Beauty on page 1345 is on the syllabus. I'm just not going to talk about it. I'll include it on the final in the sense that, the title might show up and you give the author, George Gordon, Lord Byron. But we're not going to discuss it. What we are going to discuss, the next poems that are on the syllabus, Dog's Death, we've already done. Midterm Break, I'm not going to include. It won't be on the final. I've not done a handout for it. Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, we've already done. So for the 19th, Death Be Not Proud and Batter My Heart, we'll do those 2 today. And then the next 2, Because I Could Not Stop for Death, and I Know That He Exists, we'll do those today. For Monday of next week, we'll then do The Caller. We've already done La Belle dans Sans Merci. And we'll do Dover Beach and the Dover Bitch, which I will bring the handout on Monday. And then for Wednesday, Dulce Decorum Est, Charge of the Light Brigade, which is on page 965 in your syllabus, in your book. In the syllabus, I put handout because it's not been in previous editions of this. Shakespeare's That Time of Year Thou Mayst in Me Behold on page 1366. And then I'm adding this, When 40 Winters Shall Besiege Thy Brow, another sonnet by Shakespeare, on 1367. And I'm dropping this, which was going to be given by handout. It's a pretty long poem. I'm just not going to include it. So, John Donne's Death Be Not Proud. You've got a brief introduction to Donne on page 1025. And one comment about this poem and Batter My Heart on 1348. This poem, your editor gives you a date of 1611 that Donne wrote this poem. In Batter My Heart, your editor says Donne wrote in 1610. I wrote my dissertation on Donne's Holy Sonnets, which these are 2 of. I produced an edition of those Holy Sonnets because there's 19 of them. They exist in a whole bunch of manuscripts, and they're arranged in different ways. So it's a pretty complex problem. We don't know when Donne wrote these things. So to say 1610 in 1611 is just ludicrous. Most scholars who have looked at the dating of the Holy Sonnets suggest that they were probably written sometime between 1608, 1609, and 1611, 1612. For most of them. The last 3 Holy Sonnets, they're numbered 17, 18, and 19, were most likely written after the death of Donne's wife, because number 17 is about the death of his wife. She died in 1617. Okay? The other 2 kind of allude to his wife, so we assume that those are also written after 1617. So, the dates that are given are just stupid. Death Be Not Proud. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure. Then from thee much more must flow. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke. Why swell'st thou then? When short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. Now, one thing to be aware of with not only Donne, with all poets really, well, with most poets, is punctuation is really important. Because punctuation indicates how you should read the poem. With Donne, that's difficult because we have only one poem written in his own handwriting. And it's what's called a verse letter. That is, it is a letter he wrote to a friend written in the form of a poem. Everything else we have by Donne, in terms of the poetry, is copies. Okay? And so we don't know whether the punctuation that are in those copies are Donne's punctuation. For example, in the Holy Sonnets, there are, I can't remember how many copies of this poem, 25 or 30, and there's a lot of different punctuation. Your first line here, death be not proud, comma. Some of them have a semicolon, some of them have a period. So that it becomes, death be not proud, period. Short declarative statement. Though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so, etc. So, what's our speaker saying? Don't be proud, death, even though some have called you mighty and dreadful, because you're not. Okay? Why is death not mighty and dreadful? Here's why. For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death. Nor yet canst thou kill me. What's the speaker mean? They're not dead? No. They're not dead how? Physically, they're dead. Their bodies are dead. Spiritually, the soul is still alive. That's what the speaker's getting at. The death can't kill the soul. Okay? That's why Christ says, don't fear death. Fear him who can kill the soul. That's the second death. Okay? So, you think you overthrow people, but they don't die. Not the souls, nor can you kill me. Then the speaker gives us another image. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure. What does he mean? Rest and sleep are images of death. They're pictures of death. They're copies of death. After all, somebody famous dies and you start to see all these things on Facebook, rest in peace. Rest. Like the person's not dead, okay? Christians will say, so-and-so fell asleep in the Lord. Jesus said about Lazarus to the disciples, he's asleep. And they're like, oh, cool then, he'll wake up. He goes, no, you don't understand. He's dead, okay? So he uses that euphemism of sleep. So, from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure. Why? You have to stay awake for some reason for 36, 48 hours. What's it feel like to then finally get allowed to or be able to sleep? You just crash, right? That is, from sleep and from rest, we get much pleasure. So, if we get a lot of pleasure from sleep and rest, the speaker says, then from thee much more must flow. If death is merely a poor imitation, if sleep and rest are merely poor imitations of death, and we get a lot of pleasure from sleep and rest, then how much more pleasure will we get from the real thing? Okay? From real death. And soonest our best men with thee do go. What do they get? Rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Hamlet talks about the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. He talks about the proud man's contumely. He talks about old age. The speaker here is saying, as soon as our best men, that is, the best people our society has, as soon as they die, what do? Again, Hamlet, they slough off this mortal coil. Okay? Now, you guys are all young. You don't have a lot of quote-unquote pains and aches just from age, from living. But when you get to be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, you will. That's what he's getting at. They will have rest of their bones, their arthritis won't hurt anymore, and their souls will be free. Thou art slave. See, does death think of itself as a slave? No, it thinks of itself as a master. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, desperate men. Desperate, the word literally means without hope. So who are men without hope who might use death as a weapon? Escape. Somebody who's hungry might be willing to kill for food. Somebody whose family is hungry might be willing to kill for food. Okay, if your family's hungry, you're desperate. Okay? A robber who's caught in the midst of a robbery and dust with poison, war, and sickness dwell. Okay, it might be cool to dwell with kings, but chance, fate, desperate men, poison, war, sickness, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. What's he mean by poppy? What do we get from poppies today? Opium. They knew about opium in Dunn's day. That is, drugs can make us sleep as well. As well? And better than thy stroke. How so? How would you rather die? In a convalescent home, racked with pain, or an overdose? And you just drift off to sleep. No pain, no sorrow, just sleep. Like having an animal put down. The animal just drifts off to sleep in a painless way. Why swellst thou then? That is, why are you all puffed up with pride? One short sleep past. Right? How long do you sleep when you quote unquote sleep in death? Well, it's eternal, but we wake eternally. Right? Because what happens, Christian theology, when you die, you're immediately one place or another. Okay? Some of the manuscripts read, we live eternally. Okay? And there's a difference, in interpretation between those two readings. Because we wake eternally implies we're always there. And another reading suggests, well, or maybe not. Maybe we're kind of in a state of limbo before the final judgment day, so to speak. And death shall be no more. Here, many of the manuscripts have periods. One or two of them, if I remember correctly, has an exclamation mark. Death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. St. Paul writes, O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? Okay? So what's the speaker doing? I'm not afraid to die. The sonnets are largely about death, mortality. Okay? So, go from there to 1348. Batter my heart. Now, Dunn became an Anglican priest, but he was not an Anglican priest when he wrote these. Pretty sure he wrote them, as I said, sometime between 1608 and 1612. He becomes an Anglican priest in 1615. One of the reasons 1608, 1612 is given as the date for that he probably wrote these is that we know, based upon, some stuff that survives talking about him, that he went through a period of, I don't know what you want to call it, spiritual angst, spiritual questioning. What do I really believe? His family had been staunch Catholic. By the 1590s, he was apparently, not so sure about that. King James wanted him to be a priest, which meant he had to be Anglican, because there were no Catholic priests allowed. So the sonnets could have been written during that period as a means of kind of, figuring out what it was he really believed. Batter my heart. Is this how the opening couple of lines should be read? Batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet, but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to men. No, it's batter my heart. Batter means what? Get a ram, break those doors down. Okay? Three-person God. Why? Trinitarian. He wants to have his theological ducks all lined up in a row. He's not going to be, accused of heresy or anything. For you as yet, but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to men. Knock, breathe, shine, seek to men. Those are all biblical images. Christ says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. He that lets me in, I will dwell with him. Okay? Breathe. Christ breathes on the disciples. And then the Holy Spirit is breathed on them at Pentecost. He breathes on them when he sends them out to cast out demons and stuff. Christ does. Shine. It's an Old Testament blessing. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you, etc. Seek to men. What's the whole purpose of quote-unquote life, supposedly, within the Christian tradition, is to do what? To repair what's been broken. Us. Okay? So, notice, you're knocking, you're breathing, you're shining, you're seeking to men. That's not going to do it. That's kind of like, mending a little tear in a piece of fabric that's got a giant hole. What do you need to do? You got to break it. That I may rise and stand, overthrow me. How's that for a paradox or an oxymoron? That I may rise and stand. That implies I am currently prostrate on the ground. So that I can get up, knock me over, and do what? Bend your force. That is, put all your focus right on me. Focus your energy on me, God. And do what? Break, blow, burn, and make me new. Break, blow, burn. It's an image of threshing. Get some wheat kernels, grains, in your hand, and do this. And what do? That breaks the husk. You blow the husk away, and then what do? You burn it. Why? Because it's no good. You don't need that. The make me new, take the little seed that's inside. That is the part that's good. And make something new of that. Different image. I, like an usurped town to another do, labor to admit you, but know to no end. A usurped town. What does it mean to usurp something? Think of Hamlet. What did Claudius do? When he killed the previous king and then became king himself, he usurped Hamlet's place. Hamlet had that line, where he says, my uncle got between the election and my place. He should have been king. Okay? So the speaker says, I am like a usurped town to another due. I'm like a town that somebody's coming in and taking control of, but I am owed to somebody else. Like there's a king over there that I am supposed to be loyal to. But a new king has taken place in me, taken reign over me. And what do? I labor to admit you. I try to let you in, but to no end. That is, to no purpose. I can't do it. I can't fulfill it on my own. Reason. Your viceroy and me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Now, we don't use the word viceroy in America. Why? Because we don't have a roy. Roy, R-O-Y, comes from the old French, roi, R-O-I. It means king. Vice king. We do have a vice president. What is the purpose of the vice president? Usually, it's ceremonial. The vice president goes to the funerals of foreign heads of state rather than the president. What's the Constitution say is the purpose of the vice president? There's really only one reason why we have one.
President dies.
To stand in the wings and wait till the person on the center of the stage dies. That's the only reason. Okay? So you can have a vice president, sitting back here going, okay, I hope nothing happens to him or her. Or you might have a vice president saying, I'm going to take care of him or her, so no, I get the job, So reason, the speaker is saying, should be the vice president in me. But it doesn't really work. Because the vice president in our system is non-acting. The viceroy, what? Is. The viceroy rules with all the powers of the king because the king is merely absent for a time. So what would happen? Let's say Trump suddenly had a stroke. 25th Amendment to the Constitution would kick in. Why? Because he would be incapable, assuming it's a major stroke, he would be incapable of fulfilling the office of president. Pence would become president. Okay? Viceroy is one who has all those powers while somebody else is away, while the king is away. So, reason, your representative in me should defend me. But what? It's captive. That is, it's taken prisoner, taken control of. And it's captive. He doesn't say or, it's and. Proves weak, ineffective, or untrue. So, reason has been taken captive by the usurper. And it's either weak. Untrue doesn't mean false. It means unloyal. It's not loyal to you anymore. Yet dearly I love you. Love is not reason. Dearly I love you and would be loved fain. Fain, it means in return. I love you, three-person God, and I would be loved in return. But I am betrothed unto your enemy. Betrothed, engaged, promised to. Why? Fallen human nature. Because the speaker is sinful. Okay? So, I love you, but I like this. I want to do what you want me to do, but, St. Paul says, the thing I should do, I don't do. The thing I shouldn't do, I do. And would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. So, God, here's what you have to do. Divorce me. Where do you go if you want to get a divorce? You got to go to court. You got to go to a judge. Divorce me. That is, break off my relationship with whom? The one who has usurped me. Untie or break that knot again. The divorce, untie, or break, all talking about the relationship with the usurper. Take me to you. Imprison me. That's the tying again. Okay? For I except you enthrall me, never shall be free. We saw that word enthrall in 2 words in La Belle Dame Sans Merci. The beautiful woman without mercy has you enthralled. What's it mean? Enslaved. So, go back to divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. All those images imply what about the speaker? I am enslaved to this usurper. Take me to you. So, how? Imprison me. Make me your prisoner, God. Why? Because unless you make me your slave, I'll never be free. How's that for a paradox? How can you be free and a slave? Okay, again, Paul talks about being slaves of Christ. But at the same time, he talks about not being slaves, being brothers. Dunn did become a preacher, bear in mind. Not very long after these were written. But that's not the real kicker. Here's the real kicker for the line. Except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. Chaste, we seem to think all the time it simply means sexually pure. It doesn't. It can also just mean pure. Right? Might not have to do with sex, might have to do with how you think, what you look at, what you read, etc. But the speaker says, I can't ever be chaste unless you ravish me. Now, ravish has 2 meanings. One is rape. Unless you sexually take me. How does that justify or juxtapose then with pure? Okay? I can never be pure unless you rape me. Huh? Well, there's another meaning of ravish, and that means to remove from. So I can't be pure, God, where? Here, in this life, unless you do what? Remove me from it. Why can't the speaker be pure here? Too much temptation? In reason, your viceroy in me is weak or untrue, and I can't say no. I can't stop myself. So the speaker is saying, God, you have got to stop me. If you want me to be pure, you have to take me entirely for and to yourself. And bear in mind, according to the scriptures, God is what? He's an all-consuming fire. So what does that do? It burns off, image of threshing again, all the rot, all the impurity, and leaves only what? What is pure. Okay? Go from there to 1062. I kind of have the poems thematically organized. You know, the first couple days are about life and love and nature and stuff, and the last few days they kind of get about death and dying and, you know, morbid stuff, if you want. 1062. This is Emily Dickinson. You've got a little introduction to her at the beginning of this section. Kind of interesting person. She had one great love in life. I mean, nothing ever happened with it. That is the guy she loved. Essentially wouldn't have, if I remember correctly, essentially wouldn't have anything to do with her. And she kind of holed up in her house for the rest of her life. Became a recluse. And most of her poems that we have were not published in her lifetime, and they were found upon her death on scraps of paper in her house. I mean, literally envelopes, backs of notes, backs of receipts, you know, just little things scribbled out all over the place. This is one. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the rain. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horse's heads were toward eternity. Because I could not stop for death. Why couldn't the speaker stop for death? Let's say the speaker's your age, not my age, not my father's age, who's 84. Why would you not stop for death?
Too busy.
Got too much to do. You got the whole rest of your lives. My dad's 84. He's lived. Literally, I'd be sad, but it wouldn't break my heart if he were, I were to get a phone call and say, Dad's dead. Say, okay. Yeah, I'd cry, I'd weep and everything, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. If one of my kids died, that'd be totally different. Why? Because they're 17 through 26. That would not be right. Because I could not stop for death, though, what did death do? Knocked on the door. Death stopped for me. Notice the verb. Death stopped. Well, what does death stop? Everything. Nothing goes on, right, after death. I don't mean spiritually. I mean, down here with the body and that kind of stuff. He kindly stopped for me, notice. How has death been described in other poems we've read? Like, to the virgins to make much of time, or to his coy mistress. Death's the grim reaper. The guy dressed in black with the sickle, just looking for people to, take off at the knees. No. This death is portrayed how? He kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. We slowly drove for his civility. He's kind of like a gentleman caller. The image I tell students all the time to have in your mind, this is like Clark Gable in Gone with the Wind. I mean, he's dressed to the nines, and he's going to pull up in the nice carriage and say, Madam. And the speaker, by the way, I do think is female because of what comes up in the fourth stanza about the gown. Might not be, but I think so. So, the carriage held but just ourselves, dash, meaning pause, and immortality. Why? Because once you're dead forever. Okay? Dead here. No. You might be in a religious tradition that says, yeah, but you might rise from the dead, in which case you're alive. Yeah, true. But that's when what? This whole world passes away. That's another kind of existence, so to speak. We slowly drove. Why slowly? Does death really have a place to get to? Is time an issue anymore? No, it's not. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too. Why does the speaker put away her labor and leisure? Labor and leisure both occur where? When? In time. They only occur in time. Okay? What is leisure without labor, work? Maybe leisure is not a word used. Fun, entertainment, recreation. What is that without work? It doesn't mean anything without work. Well, what is work without that? It also kind of becomes meaningless because they only exist in opposition to each other in time. We passed the school. Why start at the school? Where does our time begin? Youth. We pass the school. We're children. What's the verb? What are they doing at recess? Strove. Why? Striving implies what? Work. It's hard. I don't know what recess is like anymore today. I mean, when my kids were at one of the elementary schools they had a witch of a principal, and punished the kids if they didn't do good, well, on the standardized test so that they would remove recess for not doing well on the test. It's utterly asinine. When I was a kid in school back in the 60s, recess was exactly that. It was get out of the classroom and go have fun. And it wasn't where everything, was monitored, where you had teachers or parents breathe. It was go away from us so we can go have a smoke or talk or whatever, and you go do that kind of thing, okay? But it involved what? We would come back in from recess and be hot, even if it was winter, and sweaty. Why? Because we worked at recess. We made sure we kind of, wrung every bit of time out of it that we could. That's what the speaker means. They strove. They worked hard. But it's recess. What does recess really imply? It's a pulling back. It's kind of like sleep, rest, but it's not. They did that in the ring. What's in the ring? Are these a bunch of, little kids beating each other up in a boxing ring? No. It might be the recess, the playground is like ring shaped. Could be that. Could be they're playing the old kids game, which definitely would have been known of and probably played in Amherst, Massachusetts, where she was from. Ring Around the Rosies. But even that game is indicative of what? Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes to ashes, we all fall down. I mean, you're supposed to fall down. What does that game talk about? It's the Black Death. So this game that little kids play, they're talking about people falling over, and in some versions it's not ashes to ashes, it's achu achu, which is a symptom, sneezing, of bubonic plague. And that's how it's spread, okay? That's a whacked out thing to be teaching little kids, to mimic the Black Death. We passed the fields of gazing grain. Notice, moving from city to the outside of the city, we passed the setting sun. Okay, now that's like traversing whole manifest destiny thing, going to the widest, farthest horizon. And then we get, or rather, he passed us. Well, how does the sun pass over you? I gave it away. It passes over you, which means you're beneath the sun. The dews drew quivering and chill. Right? That happens once the sun sets. They drew. How? Where does dew form? On the ground. Okay? For only gossamer, my gown, my tippet only tulle. Tippet is shawl. Okay? What is her gown and tulle? Most scholars think the speaker is suggesting, at this point, sinking into the ground. That is, the spirit's above, but the body's going below. And what's the gossamer? The dew on top of the grave. This is all I have now for bodily clothing. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. This is the mounding over of the grave. After the casket's been put in, the grave's been filled, you mound it over. Why? So that as the dirt settles, and if it's a wooden casket, as the casket rots and caves in, the dirt settles and you have flat, level ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Well, what's the roof? It's the top of the casket, or it's the top of the grave, barely visible. Why? Because it's sunk. The cornice is taken to be the headstone. Go to a really old cemetery. There are some actually in Rutherford County where there are some guys who fought in the Revolutionary War are buried. Okay? Died in 1820, 1823, things like that. But those aren't really old. Go to a really old cemetery. In other words, leave the United States. Because that's why I don't teach American literature. It's too young. Go to England. Go to a church that's been there since 1200. Go in that church's cemetery. And many of the headstones will not only be kind of cockeyed, leaning to one side, leaning backward, flat on their face, but sometimes you go to them, if this is the headstone and it was set up like this, by the time you see it today, it's like this. And this is the ground. Why? It's sinking because of its weight. Since then, when death stopped for me, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Well, when did she first surmise the horses' heads were towards eternity? When death stopped for her. Kind of implying, I didn't know that was the day I was going to die. And yet, it's been centuries since then, and the time since then seems shorter than how long did the speaker live on the day the speaker died? We don't know. We don't know if the speaker died 8 hours into the day, 12 hours into the day. But the speaker is saying, since then, it's been like a blinking of an eye. St. Paul says, it will be like the twinkling of an eye, and we shall be raised, okay, within the Christian tradition at least. Go from there, one last one, by Emily Dickinson, to, on page 1080. I know that he exists. Notice, I know. It's not I believe. I know. Knowledge is rational. Knowing is factual. I know that he exists. And then the speaker says, somewhere in silence, he has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. Who's the he? Okay. Who's the person that exists? Nice dodge, by the way. What he usually gets capitalized? God. Okay? So, let's say I know that God exists. Somewhere in silence, he has hid his rare life. Why is it rare? How many of you have seen God? Today, yesterday, last week, last month, last year, your entire freaking life. Not many of us. Not many people ever, you know. So his life is rare. It's not ever seen, but seldom seen. Why? Because our eyes are gross. What does that mean, gross? Louder. Impure. They're thickly over. I mean, it'd be like if I had cataracts and my eyes would be all cloudy and milky. Okay? Our eyes aren't refined enough to see God. What's the tis? Tis an instant's play. Well, the tis is what's coming up later. What's an instant's play? What's a fond ambush? Just to make bliss earn her own surprise. Bliss. That's heavenly bliss. That's felicity, happiness, joy. To make that be earned. Okay? What's the fond play? What's the foolish ambush? It's why I know he exists, his rare life. The speaker is suggesting God every time does like the Wizard of Oz when the damn little dog, Toto, grabs that curtain and does what? Pulls it back. That God every now and then pulls back the veil between himself and where we are and says, look this way. Gives glimpses of joy or beauty or happiness or moment that makes one start to try to find him. But should the play prove piercing earnest, that is, either God's glance becomes piercing or we see him earnestly. Go back to Exodus for a moment. Moses is there. He's on Mount Sinai. And Moses says, let me see you. And God says, can't do it. No man can see my face and live. Tell you what I'll do. Hide yourself in that rock and I'll go by and I'll cover my hand over you. And as I go by, you can look at my backside. And what happens? Moses does, and he comes down from the mountain looking how? Shining from within. Okay? So, should the play prove piercing earnest? What's the play? It's the ambush. It's the instance play. God is being portrayed here like a new parent, a new father, let's say. I'll use father since I'm a father, with a baby. Not a brand new, 1 day old, 3-week old, but like a 6-month-old. And you put that 6-month-old on a bed, and you get a blanket, and you cover the baby, and you go, peekaboo, where's whatever the kid's name is, or where's daddy? And what's the child do? Laughs and smiles. Does it bring a whole lot of joy to the kid? Not really. Does it bring a lot of stupid joy to the parent? Yep. That's all for the parent. Okay? It's God going, peekaboo. See me? Now you don't. Now you don't. I'll let you get a glance, but not a long one. But what if the piercing earnest should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare? That is, what if God doesn't go peekaboo, but goes, here I am? What would happen? The glee, the joy, the happiness. See, a glee club is not a singing club. Glee, its old meaning, means happiness, joy. The glee would what? It would glaze frozen over in death's stare. No one can see God and live. It would be a happy facial expression. The person would not be, dying with a frightful, like they've seen a ghost. It'd be, I used the example one day of, if we could hear the music of the spheres, we'd immediately die. We'd immediately be taken up to heaven because the sound would be so enraptured and we'd have a look of utter bliss on our faces. That's what's being talked about here. But the happy face would be glazed over in death's stiff stare. Would not the fun look too expensive? That is, wouldn't God then have to go, oops, sorry, didn't mean for you to see that much? Would not the jest, peekaboo, have crawled too far? What's the import? What's the speaker really saying? Where's my lid? That's not what the speaker said. This is why God doesn't reveal himself. That's why. He does what? Little glimpses. What are the glimpses designed? Lead you on. Okay, we'll stop there. Man, it's just like my first class, 4 minutes to go. So for Monday, we will do the caller on 1352. We've already done La Belle dans Sans Merci. So Dover Beach, and I'll bring the handout for Dover Beach. Probably have a quiz. I think I'll probably just make it on Wednesday. And it'll be probably over the poems from today through Wednesday. So she walks in beauty, essentially down. I really hope none of you get this crud, because believe me, you'll want to die at points. Okay, there we go.